Hello and welcome to Unabridged, the weekly podcast where teachers take on books. This is Sara. Join us for bookish episodes and a monthly book club pick.
This is Ashley. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at UnabridgedPod or go to our website, unabridgedpod.com, where the books we read are linked for purchase.
This is Jen. Check out our Teachers Pay Teachers store, our Patreon page, and our newsletter. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts to support us. You want opinions about books? We've got them. Hey, this is Jen. We are excited to debut today one of our new episode types. So this is, we started a new format with our book club episodes, and we wanted to think about better ways to reach teachers than the way we've been doing it. So from now on, we'll have one episode a month that we create with teachers in mind, though we do think these topics will be interesting for all readers, all bookish people, but definitely teachers would be our prime audience here. So before we get started, we just want to remind you to find us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, rate, and review. That helps us a lot, and we would really appreciate it. So before we get started, we are going to do our Bookish Check In. Sara, what are you reading?
Well, I just finished a book, so I actually have a book ready to go for my next book in real life book club. And I am going to be reading The Less People Know About Us, A Mystery of Betrayal, Family Secrets, and Stolen Identity by Axton Betz-Hamilton. And it was actually nominated for the book club by our very own Jen. And I'm really excited. I love memoirs, and this is a memoir about identity theft. And I'm really excited to read it. I don't know a ton about it. I actually tried not to read too much because I just wanted to be a surprise. So I will be updating you on that in a later episode.
Great. All right, Ashley, how about you?
I am currently listening to / reading Mark Oshiro's Anger is a Gift. And I've been wanting to get to this one for a long time. Jen and I saw him speak at Teen Fest in D.C., well, outside of D.C., last spring, and he is just an amazing person and an activist and just really passionate about a lot of really important social issues, and I think you see a lot of that in the book as well. So I am glad that was another one on my backlist, so I'm always excited to check that off. And also I am appreciating, there are a lot of things I appreciate about it, but one of the things I think that I'm most appreciating is that Oshiro does a really great job of being very conscientious about representing a lot of different types of characters in the story. And for example, one that I don't remember seeing readily in any young adult that I've read. I don't know that I've ever seen it as a prominent character, but it's a non-binary character. And so one of the characters uses the pronoun they and is one of the major characters. And I just really appreciate that because I think that is not what the story is about at all. And I think what I really appreciate is there's a lot that he shows through his different characters that show them as real people who walk in the world in different ways, and that is not what this story is about, but that representation I think is really amazing, especially for teens to see.
Yeah. All right, so my book is Amanda Lindhout and Sara Corbett's A House in the Sky, and this is Lindhout's memoir. I am doing this one for a buddy read with Tony, and Lindhout I'm only 89 pages in, so I will say I'm still at the beginning, so nothing here is going to be too spoilery, but Lindhout grew up in a very poor household, and one of her methods of escaping her situation was looking at National Geographics, and so she dreamed of these other worlds and of traveling, and when she became, I think she was in her early 20s, she just decided she was finally going to do it. So she was waitressing, and she saved up money and just started traveling around the world. So that is all happening at the beginning of the book. But before we launch into any of that, I guess it's a preface, is Lindhout being held by kidnappers in Somalia. So you know from the moment you start the book that she's been kidnapped, she's being held, then it's flashing back to her childhood, and you're sort of seeing how this traveling came to be. And I will just say it is beautifully written. I don't know yet the circumstances that led to her being kidnapped, so I am really definitely intrigued. I'm a little worried and scared because there's some horrible things happening, but it has definitely caught my attention, so I'm anxious to continue reading that. So our topic today is why teach YA Lit. So why do you think teachers should teach young adult literature? So we thought we would start just a little bit. All of us taught YA Lit, and so we thought we'd talk about the way we came to that, and then we'll move on to our discussion of why we think it's a great idea. So Ashley, would you like to start? Sarah looks really scared.
That was a fake out.
I saw your face get panicked, and I was like, I won't do that to my friend.
Well, and I was starting to talk anyway, so it all worked out okay. So I taught more classical literature to lots of students. Sorry for those of you out there listening, particularly those of you that I might have drugged through difficult text for maybe no benefit other than that it was canonical and traditionally taught. So I have done that for sure. And I think that one of the first times that I got away from that with a regular class was in Kentucky. As a team, the 11th grade teachers decided that we would teach Alice Sebold's The Lovely Bones. And there were a lot of reasons that came about, but so that's not YA, but it is contemporary. It's very fast moving. It's engaging for kids. And it was just, again, we kind of stumbled upon it. I mean, honestly, at that point in my career, I knew very little about YA. I was not reading it a lot. We weren't well versed in it. There were a lot of other initiatives that we were working on in the school that I was at in Kentucky. And so that wasn't our focus. And the thing for me that was so transformative is that there were a lot of times that a student would come into me and say, this is the first book I have read in my whole life. Mm-hmm. And that they had read it cover to cover, that they were totally captivated. And again, I mean, now knowing the tremendous breadth of novels out there or works out there that are YA, you know, that one wouldn't be, I mean, I think it's a great book, but it would not be by any stretch of the imagination my top pick. Mm-hmm. It was just that for me, I mean, there's nothing that I want more than for kids to love what we're doing mm-hmm. and to want to do it on their own and to be proud of the work they're doing. That is what I love. And so for me, that was absolutely transformative. I mean, from that point on, I was really interested in finding literature that reached kids better. And so that kind of opened that doorway for me. And then when I moved here to Virginia, Jen will probably speak to this because we taught at the same high school when I first got here. But that was the whole movement toward YA, toward letting kids pick what they read. There was a lot of that was just really successful at the school when I got here to Virginia. And I think that because of that, I was suddenly exposed to all of this amazing literature that I just had never read before and absolutely loved. And so I think The Lovely Bones and that experience with my students definitely opened the doorway for me. But then when I got here, I realized that there was just this entire world of literature out there that I knew very little about and had read very little of before my time here. And from that moment forward, for sure, for me, that is what I gravitate toward for students. And while, I mean, I've taught AP Lit both in Kentucky and in Virginia, and I certainly still teach some classical texts because I do think that there is value in that, both in the exposure for students and in the depth of analysis that you can do and in the difficulty of reading. I mean, if you're preparing for something like an AP Lit exam, you do need to know how to read very difficult passages in an analytical way. So I still think there's merit in that, but I think that for a lot of us as English teachers, we've been clinging to that for all of our levels and all of our students because that was the way we were taught and that was what was valued. Yeah. And so I really am happy to see and to be part of that experience of shifting away from that.
Mm-hmm. Sara, how about you?
So I came into teaching a little bit differently. I went to school for business, and then I decided I wanted to switch careers, and I took the praxis in our state and got certified, and I didn't really do any student teaching, and so I just kind of got not thrown into a classroom, but I just remember being led to my classroom and my principal being like, okay, well, let me know if you need anything. And I'm standing in my classroom. I'm like, where's the manual, you know? And so how I came upon YA is my first year, I just really didn't know the availability of the different types of texts to read. So I did what the teachers before me had done. Mm-hmm. And one of those was a great choice, The Outsiders, which I continued to teach throughout my whole English teaching career because I found that it really connected with a lot of students. Students in general across the board really liked it. They could find themselves in one of the characters. And so I started to think about how could I replicate that, what I get with The Outsiders, with the other books that I taught. And like I said, that first year I had some misses. I mean, I just remember the kids being like, what are you doing? And I just was doing what was left in my room. Right. So then the following year I read The Hunger Games, and this was before the movies came out. So it was just the books, and I had it was so fast moving. I fell in love with it. I plowed through the series and I just loved it. And I was like, I want my students to be able to read this. If I could do I thought if I could do the first book, then if they love it, there's two more books that they probably will read. So I wrote a grant to get The Hunger Games for my students, and we read it together. And I had some really tough kids that year, and they loved it. And they read Catching Fire, and they read Mockingjay, and we went on a field trip to see the movie. And it was just, even though it was not like a traditional text that you read in English, it was just so gratifying to see the way that the kids were able to connect with the themes and what was happening, and that they wanted to read the book. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is that it enabled the students to be able to read something and then be excited about reading something else. So that was kind of my first experience with teaching YA and realizing the powerful way that it can affect lots of students and lots of different students with lots of different reading levels. So that was mine.
So I was trying to get my thoughts in order before we started, and so I was trying to look back because it's hard to remember, like, once you've arrived at a place. But so when I first came to the high school where Ashley and I both taught for a while, that was in the fall of 2000. And I will say, at that point, our school was pretty progressive even then. So I had all English 11 that year, and we all sort of agreed on the books we were teaching. And that year we taught David Baldacci's Wish You Well, which is a book that takes place in the Appalachians and focuses on two kids. Again, like Ashley was saying about The Lovely Bones, it is not YA, but it is contemporary. It is acknowledging the fact that there is good stuff written all the time and that we can read popular fiction, and it is worthwhile. We also taught a book, Bob Greene's Be True to Your School, a diary of 1964. And basically Bob Greene, when he was in high school, kept this diary and wrote in it every day. He was a junior. And so we taught that with our kids, and he's thinking about sex, and he's thinking about grades, and he's thinking about frustration with his parents. So it was a book, it's not YA, but I think it was easy for our kids to relate to. So I went at it that way, but I also definitely was still teaching those canonical texts, The Great Gatsby and The Crucible, and books texts that I still love, but maybe weren't as relevant to the kids. So I did that for a long time. And then I think where I started was our school really started emphasizing SSR. And I remember the year, so at the beginning of every year on the first day of school, I would have the kids go around the room and introduce themselves and tell me, what did you want to be called? And then I said, I want you to tell me your favorite book or a book that you love. And like half of all of my classes were reading Twilight. And I was like, I haven't read this book. Maybe I should go get it. So I went kind of begrudgingly and got the first book. And oh my gosh, I tore through it in one night. I stayed up till like 2 a.m. the first week of school. Not a great plan, but I finished it. I went to the bookstore and got the last book wasn't out yet, but 2 and 3 were out. And I was like, why is this not what we're reading? And I just kept thinking about myself in high school and how much I would have loved those books and the ways that I thought I could understand why my students were loving those books. And when I was in high school, my English teacher, I had one grade 7 through 12, and she taught mostly classics, but I remember we read Catherine Patterson's Jacob Have I Loved, which is written, I don't even know if it was not called YA then, but it would now be called YA. And I remember having loved it. So it's just this gradual, why are we not doing this? So we started the SSR. You talked about Hunger Games, Sara, and oh my gosh, the year we really embraced SSR, I just remember I had this group of boys, like Ashley, you were saying, who were like, I've never read a book before, and they devoured the Hunger Games and were so hungry for any books like that. And I remember this one boy.
That was a great pun, Jen.
Oh my God. No, sorry, that was unintentional, truly.
I just want to make sure I pointed it out.
This boy came up to me. Sorry, I just hit the mic. This boy came up to me and he said, Miss Moyers, I am really mad at you. And I said, why? And he said, I have all this free time, but all I want to do is read. And I was like, oh my gosh, one of those teacher moments. And so then I was like, why are we not teaching it? Yeah. And SSR is great, and I still support that, and I think that is important to have choice. But I also think when we are teaching books whole class, which I believe is important because I love that discussion, it's also great to have those books be YA too. Mm-hmm. So our school did a whole school reads. Ashley was there at this point, read Divergent, every grade level, and at varying levels of success. And I absolutely loved it. Ashley wrote some brilliant lesson plans that she shared on her blog. Yes. Brilliant lesson plans that got at why it made sense for kids to read them and the types of things that kids are thinking about every day and that were really powerful. But I also remember some people in my department being really upset and being frustrated that they had to teach this book that they didn't think was worthwhile. So I guess let's get to that. What do you think people's objections are? Why would anyone be reluctant to teach young adult lit?
I mean, I think that a lot of people it's kind of that thing that it has always been done. So and that's what's accepted and that's what you do. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think even having been a student in my life and then also a teacher, I think even books, I mean, I've been on record on the podcast that classics are just not my favorite. Mm-hmm. And I read To Kill a Mockingbird in high school. And I mean, it was fine for me. It was fine. I liked it fine. But not until I was an adult and had more life experience did it really impact me the way that it should have, And I think that a lot of the classical text, which I probably, if I would give them another try, I would like it. But because I was trying to read these texts in high school when I had all this other stuff going on and it just felt really distant for me, that is what made me as a teacher be like, I need to figure out something different. But I do think that people are just really protective of their content. And I think there is validity in knowing those cornerstone texts. But I just think for every reader, and I mean, I'm coming from a different place because I taught 8th graders. So I was in a middle school. And I mean, that is a hard sell. Even when we did poems, I mean, some of that is really difficult for struggling readers to be able to understand and get in figurative language is just really hard. So I think that people want to hold on to what they know and what they like and what they think that English entails, like the text and the. But for me, like I said, I just feel like students aren't able a lot of times to see the validity in those type of texts until they're older and have more experience.
Yeah, and I think that one thing. For me, I think there's a stigma attached to YA that sometimes people think that it doesn't have any literary merit or maybe enough literary merit. And I don't know that I don't know that English teachers are often thinking that at the forefront of their mind. But I think that there is a notion that there is a right kind of text to teach. And I mean, even at the AP Lit level, that was a discussion that we were often having with the question that was open where kids could choose from a list that they provide, or they could choose any other book of literary merit. And there was a lot of discussion about what would not be scored and what was permissible as literary merit, as having literary merit. And I think that because that is ambiguous and because people want to make sure that they're teaching something of value and that is of perceived value also, that there's some of that too. But again, I think those walls are coming down, and I think that there is some fear and people do want to hold on to the books that they love. That's one thing. But I think there's also this fear of people getting kickback from, I mean, like you said, Jen, there was resistance when people taught Divergent. And I think that we have to work through that in order to have success. But I think that anyone who teaches some YA Lit with kids who has also taught texts that are not as accessible is going to feel that gratification of reaching kids. I mean, that's a great feeling. And I think for teachers who are willing to take that step, it's a very quick and very rewarding feeling. Like, I think it happens immediately once you've tried the text, and also that it's a great feeling.
And I mean, to me, like when you teach, I think that you need to think about what is my goal, and if it's for the kids to be able to access the text, because I mean, I read a lot of really dark, like texts that people would say have literary merit. I mean, like Edgar Allan Poe, but that's really hard to access for kids.
Oh my goodness, yes.
And so, I mean, like the Hunger Games, I had to get a permission slip signed for my kids to read it because, I mean, it is violent. But, I mean, they're able to understand it. But I would argue that it's no more violent than the things you could read in Poe or other authors, but it's just more easily understood. And, I mean, I feel like that as teachers, we want our kids to be able to understand what they're reading so then they can find those literary things like theme and understand why authors make the choices they do. But if they can't understand the text, then
that's right. Then all of it is decoding.
Yeah,
all you're ever doing is decoding.
Right.
I would say too, I think there's a fear that maybe there's not enough to talk about in YA Lit, and I would argue that YA Lit is just like adult lit, that some of it is deeper than others.
Yes.
And so there are YA books that I have read that I have absolutely loved, but I would not teach it because it's pretty straightforward and maybe there aren't as many layers. But then Ashley and I both taught A.S. King's Everybody Sees the Ants. Man, there's a lot to parse in that book and to consider. And we taught that whole class, and I taught that both with regular English 11 and with my English 11 honors classes. And the discussions were so rich, and there was so much about writing style and structure and reality and there's a lot about bullying, about something that our kids they would just say they were really interested in talking about it. And so I think that fear that you're going to get there to a discussion in class and everybody's going to say, well, I liked it. And then you don't have anywhere to go.
Right.
I think you could equally say about some adult literature that, again, I would say, read it on your own. Maybe don't teach that whole class. So I think it's just choosing the appropriate book for your purpose. If your purpose is to have a great book for SSR, it can be wide open. If your purpose is to have a book that you want to teach whole class, you can do that with YA Lit or adult Lit. You have to be equally as careful with selection either way.
Yeah.
And I think in defense of teachers who have been teaching the same text, I mean, YA and even middle grade have only really been so robust in the last decade or so. And I mean, I think a lot, even about middle grade, there is just so much we've covered some of them, some really good middle grade books that are super easy to access, but that deal with some really hard things. And I also think about Wonder. I mean, I think Wonder is a book that you could teach.
I taught that with my juniors.
Yeah. I mean, like you could teach middle grade or upper elementary all the way through high school. And so, I don't know. I just think that sometimes it is also an awareness issue that people don't understand. Maybe teachers who have been teaching for a long time or teachers who are new to the profession don't realize how robust it is that the YA and middle grade, how robust the categories are now, because they weren't like that even when I was in school.
Right. I mean, I do think, like you said, Jen, Twilight was one of the first times that I saw kids in my classroom, a lot of whom had the same book. And it was this moment of realizing that there was this phenomenon happening out there that was taking place, and same with the Hunger Games. I think that those series really were transformative. And we've talked about Twilight before. We're not going to get into it today. There are some problems with the series, I think, especially when you're thinking about instructing. But I do think that those were both transformative novels, that like those series that opened these floodgates to all these works out there that, again, there were people out there doing this. And like you said, Jen, even when we were kids, there were books out there that weren't labeled that way, but they were definitely written for kids differently than a lot of other books. But I do think they're just much more common and just covering such a wider array of issues. And I think, just to echo, I think you talking about, Jen, when you said Everybody Sees the Ants, that the other thing that we did that year is we decided we wanted to cover social issues, but we were flexible on which ones we were going to cover. And so we were going to construct some units around issues that the kids voted to discuss. And I just found that entire experience, I mean, again, it was really an eye-opening moment for me, that a tremendous number of students, well over half of all of our students combined, voted for bullying as being their top thing that they wanted to discuss. And I think that as a teacher, I had always handled that so carefully and tried really hard in some ways not to discuss it because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. And then to realize that a lot of them, when given an anonymous survey, were desperate to discuss this thing that was so pervasive in their world, and yet that people, a lot of times with the best of intentions, were not talking about. Because again, I just saw it talked about badly often. And I often tried to be protective of their privacy, protective of their feelings, and just didn't take it head on. And I think that was just really, that was part of why we chose that book, was because it addressed bullying in such a direct way. And just some of the other issues that they were passionate about discussing. It was just really helpful for us to see that, because there are so many young adult books that are taking on these really heavy issues, but in a way, like you said, Sara, that students can reach. And I think, I want to say one more thing. That what you said, Sara, about the books that we've taught that take on such heavy issues. I mean, I think that for me, one of the times that I really realized that I was ready to step back from some of the classical works with my regular classes is when I was teaching Elie Wiesel's Night, which I think is a phenomenal piece of literature. But I found that my students were totally removed from it. And that was awful for me to experience. To be reading something that was so profoundly moving and to see how distant they were, how they were just totally unable to connect with the text. And we did a lot of other, of course, I, like a teacher does, I tried to learn and restructure and reshape the unit in a way that helps them think about what was going wrong, how we got to where we were, and how we have some ability in our lives to make better choices to try to not let that kind of thing happen. But still, I just remember one of my most favorite students was just like, why do we have to read this? And it's painful to hear someone say that, because, and I feel bad. I feel guilty saying it right now because it makes me feel bad that the kids felt that detached from something that both happened in real life and that Elie Wiesel experienced himself and that he wrote so beautifully about. But I think that's the reality we have to face, is that sometimes the things that we think should be so profoundly moving for kids, just like you said with To Kill a Mockingbird, which honestly, I don't know that I knew that you felt that way in high school about it. And Sara talks about that book all the time as being one of her all-time favorites.
Yeah. And I think, and like I said, I liked it in high school. It was probably one of the only books that I actually read that much. And I loved English, but once I got out of high school and having AP English and advanced English classes, I was like, I'm never reading again because I found the experience so, I just hated it. I hated reading. I hated reading those books that I did not care about. I wanted to be able to pick my own books, but I did like To Kill a Mockingbird. But only when I reread it as an adult was I so profoundly moved. And I just think that comes with experience and maturity. And I think that what young adult does so well is for one thing, some students read those books and they cannot see themselves. The text, like classics and things like an older text, they cannot see themselves in it. So then it's really hard to connect to it. And as adults, we can, because we can see the bigger picture. But as kids are a lot of times, self-focused and they can't see themselves in it. So I think that YA has really given us this opportunity as teachers to be able to give kids texts that they can actually see themselves in, no matter who they are. And I think that is really powerful. And I think that it is important for us to harness that power and get those books in the hands of the students.
I feel like this is going to be a downer. I don't want to be disingenuous. Like, I still taught the classics. And so I guess that's what I want to say, is it doesn't have to be either or. Like, I was trying to teach YA lit, but also still the classics that I thought it was important for some of my students to read. And so I think that can be powerful too. So maybe you teach a dystopian novel like The Hunger Games alongside something like Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, and then you talk about why dystopian is relevant from the 1950s until the 2000s. And I think there are ways that you can pair books, or just think about things that have been relevant for a long time. I think that's powerful as well. So I think that it doesn't have to be a choice.
Right.
And so I think as I started integrating my classes more, I just saw kids a lot more willing to take on the books that I was giving them.
Yeah.
The other thing I will say that was really refreshing when we did Everybody Sees the Ants, because again, that's a challenging book. So when I taught something like The Great Gatsby, which y'all know is one of my all-time favorites, but kids were online. And I tried to create assignments that ask them to think about it. But you can find 50 essays out there about The Great Gatsby. When you're teaching a book that is new, you know that what the kids are saying, that those are their thoughts and their opinions. And that's empowering for me, but also for them, because I think it's saying what you think matters and your ideas about this book matter. And that's why I'm asking you to express them. You don't have to go to this other authority because it's a book that's been out there for so long and you're joining this context or this tradition of analysis. And so you have to match what people have thought before you. What you think is the first thing that you need to think about. And so I thought that was really cool too. And for some of my honors kids, that was tough because they were used to being able to go online and, kind of search it and mix that with what they thought about it and come out with this really coherent theory. It was cool to watch them struggle. And that sounds mean, but it really was. Like they had to work out with A.S. King uses magic realism, and there is no firm answer in that book about some of the things that are happening. And so then when you watch them trying to figure it out, it was cool to watch them come up with theories that then they had to support with quotations from the text, which is what we want kids to do. Anyway, sorry, that was a rant. But yeah, just that idea of both being powerful, I think is something else I would advocate for.
Yeah, and I really like that idea of using them together to be able to be more accessible for students and to be able, I think that if you start out with something that's easier, then the harder thing is easier to find the connections. And I think that is a great scaffolding mechanism too.
And I think sometimes when they're reading those historical texts and looking at a time period before, I mean, that has been Sara and I have hashed this out about To Kill a Mockingbird, so I will not hash it out right now. But I think it's easy to distance yourself from some of the things that happen because the racism in that is so overt that many students are able to say, well, that's not me.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think when you get into books like The Hate You Give, for example, then you're having to grapple with the parts of yourself that you may not want to examine, but then you have to realize are a part of maybe the way that you do carry some prejudice or you do have some bias, and that is forcing kids to confront those things. And same with Night. Again, I'm still feeling some guilt that I said that about, because it makes my students sound like they were callous people who didn't care about what was happening, and that is not the case. But I do think it was easy for them to think, well, I would never be like that Nazi. I would never do that thing. And that's just not how reality is not that black and white. Right. And so I sometimes think that both when we read things that are profoundly horrendous, like the Holocaust, and also when we read things from a long time ago, it's easier for kids to not see into that window, neither the mirror nor the window. It's easier for them to just disengage, and especially if the text is also more difficult to access. So all of that, I think, all of those things are barriers that make it harder for kids to engage in a meaningful way. Yeah. And again, if that is our objective, then we've got to find a way through that. And I agree with what Jen said, that even in my last year, I still was teaching a lot that was not young adult lit, but I did find that I really loved when I was able to start the year with young adult lit. I love doing units that revolved around that because of the buy-in, because it created a great class atmosphere. It really opened the door, and it did make it easier for me to get kids to believe that there was merit in the other things that I was going to do with them, and have them be more on board and more likely to participate. So,
and I think also, like, not even teaching whole class, but having them as options for lit circles.
Yes.
And I mean, I think there are kids who are able to read the harder text and that they want to. I mean, I had students in 8th grade who chose Jane Eyre for independent projects. Yeah. But I also had kids who were doing something a lot easier too. But I mean, it's like giving them that choice and being able to let them determine where they are. So I think.
All right. Well, we are going to do a Give Me One related to our topic. So, in light of our topic, give me one favorite YA book.
Oh, Lord.
I know. I didn't know what our topic was. So there are so many. I am going to use this opportunity to say we've been working on our website. We have bookish faves and book reviews that we're doing every week. And we don't do young adult all the time, but we are trying to share with you all those titles that we really, really love. And you're also welcome to contact us about that. And we do have a Teachers Pay Teacher store as well, where we've put on some resources for some books that we think would be great in the classroom and as whole class text. So I just want to mention that while I'm stalling. And there are so many that I absolutely love. I'm going to talk about Emily Exarpan's The Astonishing Color of After. I think that the reason I wanted to pick this one is because it is definitely YA, but it is gorgeously written, and both in theme and in style, I think that it is on the playing field of any other book of literary merit. And so I think I'm choosing it just because not only do I love it, but also because it does all of that. And I think also it hits on a lot of very, very difficult issues that kids do sometimes have to face, or they know someone who's facing them and they're having to work through it. So in it, we don't have to say all that. I can just say.
Yeah.
Okay. I felt like I had to give a summary. I don't have to give a summary. I'm out. I love that book. Read it.
Sarah, do you want to go?
Yes, I'm having trouble deciding. There's so many. I've read so many great YA books.
This may be our upcoming bookish faves.
I know.
Is our long list of some of our favorite YA picks.
Maybe it'll be a series. We can each have one.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good idea.
Because I definitely have read more YA than adult, because I was teaching and I was reading YA all the time. And I know I just know that in my mind I haven't captured all of them. So I'm like, I don't want to decide, but I'm going to. I'm going to go with Turtles All the Way Down. Because John Green is my absolute favorite. And unlike Jen, Jen always is like, that's an auto-buy author for me. I don't really have many auto-buy authors, but John Green, I will buy anything that he does. And I thought Turtles All the Way Down was just great. And I thought it dealt with mental health issues in a really deliberate yet subtle way, like caring way. I don't know how to explain it, but I just really appreciated it, and I'm going to go with Turtles All the Way Down.
All right, I'm madly scrolling through Goodreads because I thought I knew, and then I was like, oh, maybe not. But yeah, the fact that we don't have to have a big explanation is helpful. So I will do a fairly recent read, Alex E. Harrow's The 10,000 Doors of January, which I absolutely think you could teach even to the most upper level students, because that book is YA, but it is complex, it is layered, it is amazing on the character level. It has a book within a book, which is one of my favorite things. And so there are multiple stories to work through and figure out the connections and how each illuminates the other. All right.
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I decided not to say this one because I thought maybe one of you would. And so I just want to say The Hate You Give is probably my most recent favorite YA book. I think it is phenomenal, but we've talked about it so much. I wanted to give a different book, but I think that book is phenomenal.
Yeah, and that's something we have spent. I'm really not trying to pitch for our Teachers Pay Teacher stuff here, but I think when we started creating book discussion guides and also book flights, the first thing that we thought about was The Hate You Give, because we all loved it so much, and because we think that it is such a powerful text in the classroom. And then we got to thinking about police violence and the intersection of police violence and race in America. And so I think that led us to thinking about a lot of books that relate to that. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a great, very pertinent topic that kids need to know more about, but also are, forming opinions about, and that there's a lot of great literature out there for.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We would love it if you would recommend some of your favorite YA books as well, and let us know what you think about teaching YA. Thanks so much.
Do you have comments or opinions about what you heard today? We'd love to hear them.
You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at unabridgedpod, or on the web at unabridgedpod.com for a list of ways to support us.
We'd like to thank Jared Featherstone, who composed our theme music, Strings of Light, and Katie Amy of Amy Photography, our podcast photographer. Thanks for listening to Unabridged.